You're listening to the Raising Resilient Kids podcast hosted by my kids, Tom and Jeannie Klashevitz.
Well, thank you for doing another podcast with me.
Podcast number 3. Here
Yay!
we are.
Even though we really didn't need to do it, since at the beginning of the last podcast, we already figured out how to make resilient kids and just give them older siblings.
That is true, but not everybody has them. You don't have an older sibling, and you
Well,
turned
that's
out
true.
resilient. So,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
We've got to figure out why you turned out resilient.
I guess so. Well, we know who's the most effective at making resilient kids, so that would be older siblings. But also, in reflecting on the last podcast we had with Elizabeth, my daughter, of course, it reminded me of a story that made me realize who are the worst at raising resilient kids. I don't think you were there, but so this was, it was back, Elizabeth was probably 3 or 4 or so.
Okay.
We were at mom and dad's house, and she was begging, she wanted Doritos.
Okay, my question, though, is it nacho cheese or Cool Ranch?
It's got to be nacho cheese.
Duh.
Yeah, Cool Ranch is just disgusting.
Gross.
But it was, mom and dad had in their pantry, they had a whole bunch of those like little lunch bags full of Doritos. So she kept begging us to get us, and Linda and I kept saying no. So then she sneaks out we were all sitting in the family room. She sneaks out of the family room. She goes into the pantry. She pulls out one of those little Dorito bags.
Okay.
Walks back into the room, does not say anything, proceeds to slowly walk, not even make eye contact with me or Linda, walks right by me, walks right by Linda, walks all the way to the other side of the room, walks up to the rocker chair, and who's sitting in the rocker?
Oh, I know who's sitting there. That's our dad.
That's Grandpa. Again, she doesn't say anything. She just walks right up to him. With her right hand, she sticks out her right hand with the bag of Doritos in her hand. And we all start cracking up because, at 3 or 4, she already knew a sucker when she saw one.
And I was going to say, and Dad, I'm assuming, opened the bag.
Oh, yeah, of course.
She ate those Doritos. Of
Exactly.
course.
He opened the bag immediately, put her on her lap, and she just sat there, sitting on the lap, kind of looking at us with a little grin on her face, just chowing away at those Doritos. So
she is a genius.
She is a genius. So that made me realize that the people who are the worst at raising resilient kids are grandparents, because they let their grandkids do whatever the heck they want.
And I do think that most grandparents would probably totally agree with that.
They definitely would. All right, so we jump into it. I am thrilled to have our next guest. You want to jump into the podcast then?
Let's do it.
So every podcast, we start with a question from a kid, and this question today comes from Lucy, who lives in Glendale, California. Lucy writes, I experience a lot of nervousness and anxiety. When I do, everyone tells me that I need to breathe, but when I do that, it just makes it worse. Is there anything else I can do instead? So, Jeannie, I am thrilled to have this guest on to answer this question and answer a few of our other questions and kind of contribute to the podcast. But I am a little bit worried about what this means for the future of our podcast. So this is kind of like if we had a podcast about basketball and one of our first guests was Michael Jordan. It's
Whoa,
like,
okay, so we're starting out high. Okay, I see what you're saying.
like-
I see what you're saying. How are we going to build from here?
Exactly.
Got it.
Where do we go from here? Exactly.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Dr. Aude Henin, who is the co-founder and co-director of the Child Cognitive Behavioral Program and the clinical director of the Child Resiliency Program in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Henin specializes in the assessment and cognitive behavioral treatment of children with mood, autism spectrum, and anxiety disorders. Her work also focuses on the development and implementation of psychoeducational interventions to enhance coping and resiliency in youth across multiple settings. And I will add, she's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet in the world. And I'll also add the Michael Jordan of Child Resiliency, Dr. Henin.
Oh my goodness, you're too kind. And now I'm feeling like I'd better do a really great job.
No.
No. Yeah, so Dr. Henin, if you could tell us about kind of Lucy's question. Well, how would you answer that question, please?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to talk about this, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And as you were saying, what Lucy is reporting is so common. And I understand the frustration. And I think we often see kids who, as soon as we mention deep breathing or mindfulness, roll their eyes and say, oh, I've tried it. It doesn't work. And I think that emphasizes a few points. One is that we know that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for anyone. Sure. And so what we want to really do is give kids a range of tools that they can use and that they can use in different circumstances to figure out what works best for them. I want to say that there is a lot of room for approaches like breathing and mindfulness and relaxation. Those are really important tools. It's more of a question of how and when do you want to use them.
Excellent. Thank you. I met you essentially through the Resilient Youth Program that the Benson Henry Institute had put together. And that's one of the things that I love about that program is the fact that it gives a whole bunch of, different options for kids to use. Can you share with us a little bit about that program?
Absolutely. So the Benson Henry Institute has been around for decades. It was founded by Herb Benson, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but was a pioneer in the field and a leading cardiologist who really began to recognize that the impact of stress was having an impact on the cardiovascular functioning of his patients. And so researched ways to combat those effects using a term that he called the relaxation response. And he has published numerous books and articles really highlighting how powerful this can be to treat a number of different conditions. And his wife, Marilyn Wiltshire, was the one who developed Resilient Youth, so adapted it developmentally for children and adolescents. And I had the pleasure of collaborating with them several years ago to update and modernize, if you will, the approach a little bit with a related but updated approach that we call a Resilient Youth.
Awesome. What are some of the techniques in Resilient Youth or others that you've used with kids that allow them to kind of calm their nervous system, calm their anxiety, like kind of Lucy mentioned there, that aren't the breathing pieces?
So in addition to the breathing pieces, we do focus on other tools to bring on the relaxation response, which is, just to kind of define that, is a voluntary way of addressing all of the things that our bodies do when we're under stress. And so that includes mindfulness, that includes imagery, that includes physical activity, maintaining sleep hygiene. Because often when we want to use those tools is not when you're in crisis. And I think that's one of the problems, that people try to take deep breaths when they're already at a 10 out of 10 of anxiety, and that's not going to work. And in fact, maybe counter helpful, because you're actually then feeling even more pressure to do something while you're already panicked and freaking out. And so we really want to use those tools earlier on, either as a way to prevent that level of anxiety or to address it when it's at a lower level. We also focus a lot on cognitive tools, and that's my kind of CBT training, which is to pay attention to thoughts that may be unhelpful or not serve us. We all have them. We all have thinking traps and errors in thinking. We tend to have these beliefs that we carry with us that have a tremendous impact on what we pay attention to, how we interpret ambiguous situations, what we remember. And so by identifying those thought patterns and challenging them, we're coming up with alternative ways of self-coaching or thinking about the situation that can help decrease our stress tremendously. And we've also drawn now from other approaches like dialectical behavior therapy, which looks a lot at emotion regulation. So how can we validate our experiences and be more compassionate? And at the same time, how can we change our behaviors so that they're more in line with what's important to us, our goals and our values?
I think actually we had one of our listeners to our podcast kind of mention that kind of negative thought, the negative thought pattern that you have in your head, the perfectionism, the self-criticism. Do you have any techniques you teach kids that can help with that?
Absolutely. It's so common, right? We all have that coach, that harsh voice. We often talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to anyone else. Mm-hmm. And those negative thoughts have as much of an an impact as if someone else was saying them to us. So the very first technique is recognizing them. Thoughts are quick, they're fleeting, we're not usually aware of them. So by recognizing what the thoughts are and linking those to specific feelings and behaviors, that in and of itself can create just a little bit of space, and can help those thoughts have less impact. And then we have kids think through, as opposed to just taking those thoughts as truths, thinking about, well, are they accurate? Are they helpful? Is there another way of thinking about the situation? Or often we'll say, well, what would you say to a friend? If you had a friend who had done badly on a test and was saying, I'm a failure, I'll never be able to do this, what would you say to them? And maybe you can coach yourself in that same way.
There was one thing that you taught me that was one of my favorite things to teach, and that really seems to link with kids, is the Coach A, Coach B, Coach C.
Yeah.
Can you explain that one?
Oh, okay.
Yes. So I have to acknowledge that I use this example, which was originally taught by my mentor, Michael Aude. And he talks a lot about, or the story talks about a child who is playing, in this case, Little League. You can substitute another sport, and misses a pop fly, and the ball falls, and the other team gets 2 runs, and Coach A comes out, and Coach A says, "Aude, how could you have messed this up? That was the worst play I've ever seen. That's it. You're the worst player. Go sit down. You're done." Right?
Yeah.
You can imagine how Aude
Yeah.
where she's dropped the ball, maybe doesn't really want to play baseball anymore.
Right, I quit, yeah.
Is very anxious, right? Gets
Yeah.
stomach aches maybe before playing. So that's Coach A. And then in the same situation, if we go back and Aude's missed the ball and 2 runs are scored, Coach B comes out, and Coach B says, "Aude, I saw what you did. Wasn't your best move, but let me give you a couple of pointers, because I think there's some things that could help. So first of all, go back more, because it's easier to gauge where the ball's coming if you're moving forward. Keep your eye all the way until the ball's in your glove, so you don't close your glove too soon. You got this. Give it a try. I think you can do better." Now, if we go back one more time and look at Coach C comes out and says, "Aude, don't worry about it. It's all good. You're fine." If you're Aude, which coach do you want?
B, definitely. B. Yeah.
Yeah.
How come? Why not A or C?
It's not helpful.
I think, when you fail, quote unquote, in a way like that, you feel that already. I don't need anyone else to tell me that I didn't catch the ball. I'm the one that's most aware of it. What I want to know is, how can I catch the ball next time? And when you have somebody come up and doesn't really, they know that you didn't catch it, that's what it is. Let's figure out how to not do it next time. I can see that the next time that I'm out in the field, I'm going to be able to apply those things and hopefully make that catch next time.
Exactly. Right. So if your goal is to get better at playing, neither A or C really kind of achieve that. If your goal is just to enjoy the game, you don't really care about your performance, again, neither A nor C are really helpful. And so here's the thing, almost nobody says A or C, but when we coach ourselves, which coach do we tend to adopt?
Oh, whoa.
A.
Oh my gosh, A. I literally just played softball last night and struck out looking. So I was A, I can tell you that.
Right, exactly. I'm so stupid. How could I have done this? I'll never be able to play. Everyone's laughing at me. Everybody thinks I'm a loser. That Coach A is so powerful. And again, we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to others. And so recognizing that Coach A and thinking about, how can I turn that into a Coach B? Is a big part of what we teach. This isn't the same thing as, everybody gets a prize just for showing up, but it is being more compassionate and more thoughtful about how we handle our imperfections or mistakes or failures.
Sure. I also think, as a coach or a teacher or a parent, thinking about those coaches in your own head when you are addressing a kid. I mean, that really is something that works for the student, but then also for the adult in this situation of, what would I be saying to myself? What would I be feeling in this moment? And what can I say to this student or to this kid that's going to be able to uplift them and give them information to carry forward so that they can succeed next time? I see why that struck you so much, Tom. That is very powerful.
Yeah. And we say the parenting of today is the self-talk of tomorrow. So a lot of that is learned over time. And so we do want to be thoughtful about how we communicate. Again, kids, need to learn their limits, and we can acknowledge if they've messed up, but how we talk to them about that and how we support them in that makes a big difference moving forward.
Yeah, it's such a great one. It's, anybody I tell that to, the answer always is, I want Coach B, but I'm Coach A. And you just see the light bulb go off in kids' heads, and it's like, okay, I want to be more like a Coach B. And the other one you said about, what would you say to your friend, to your best friend? How would you talk to your best friend afterwards. And that's, I think those are so key to help with those situations. You mentioned earlier sleep. You kind of teach some of the sleep stuff. So how does sleep have to do with resiliency, and any tips you have for kids? Because I know a lot of kids are up all night on their phones and things like that.
Sleep is tricky. We know that kids are significantly sleep deprived, whether it's because of work or technology or just competing demands. And we know that lack of sleep is incredibly impactful on attention, emotional flexibility, empathy, social skills, everything. And so we do really think about how can we foster healthy sleep habits. We try really to be careful about, again, one size fits all. This is what you need to do, because I think that's been a huge problem in the field. So it's really more about having a conversation about, do they feel like they're getting enough sleep?
Okay.
Is their sleep quality good? And what are the things that might be interfering? So a tool that we teach throughout this program is problem solving, identifying issues and thinking about various ways of addressing them that will work for that individual child. That conversation, that process is so important.
The word that you just said there, conversation. I think we build resiliency through learning through each other and through conversations that we have, and that each kid is unique and different. The process for them to get sleep or whatever it might be is going to be different, and talking to them about what they're going through and what we can do to be able to help them to do that better. That conversation is so important.
And because we often offer these this program in a group, they help each other, and they have so much to offer, and that building of a community where they can share ideas and suggestions is also so powerful.
Well, I just wanted to say, you talked about relaxation response, and just from sitting here having this conversation with you, I feel more relaxed. So your voice is so relaxing. So maybe that's something that, from somebody who's outside of the program, that you might want to integrate in there. It's just so peaceful and calming.
Oh, thank you. That's funny. I don't know that my kids would agree.
Dr. Henin, you mentioned earlier kind of, that really kids need to build this before that crisis hits. Yeah. Most people who are listening to this are, parents or teachers or coaches or things like that. Is there a way, it's probably through the conversation we were just talking about, but how do you kind of convince kids that, hey, you got to start this now so that when that crisis hits, you're ready to go?
So I have a few thoughts. And let me start by saying that one of the reasons that I've been so privileged and so excited to do this work is that as a child psychologist who tends to see kids when they're already suffering tremendously and cannot keep up with the demand, a big part of my motivation is really to try to intervene much earlier in the process. So we know, for example, that kids with anxiety and mood disorders suffer an average of 7 to 10 years between onset of the symptoms and proper diagnosis and treatment.
Wow.
So that is a lifetime for a child.
Yeah.
And so my hope is really to recognize and intervene long before they would land on our shores. Yeah. I think it's essential that we offer this in places where kids already exist, whether it's in schools or community centers, and offer it repetitively. So start when they're little and do it in a developmentally appropriate way. And you can do this with kindergartners and first graders, and then revisit it throughout their development and years in an increasingly sophisticated way so that they have it under their belt. We're not introducing it at age 15 as a foreign concept. And, that it's just integrated as part of it's part of their everyday lives and world. So it doesn't, I think, have as much resistance, if that makes sense.
It does completely. I think it's that consistent repetition. And then when, I may not need it when I'm in kindergarten or first grade, but the consistency when I do need it, when that crisis is out, oh yeah, I remember this. I've been learning this.
It's like any tool. You wouldn't be playing soccer and not ever go to practice and then be thrown into the big game and have a clue what to do. And if you were, you wouldn't want to do that again. So I think it's really working on it when things are not at their peak. So that those tools are available when that happens.
I think that's a great point, because you think about, because so many kids play sports or they play a musical instrument or anything like that. And if you can talk to them about, hey, how often do you practice so that you're ready for that game or that concert or whatever it is? Well, every day. Well, it's the same thing with this type of stuff. You got to practice it every day so that you're ready when that game, if you will, kind of happens.
And like any tool, you're not going to be good at it at first. So I think a lot of kids go, I tried it, I can't do it. Well, of course you can't. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't write your letters the first 200 times you practice, you've got to keep at it. And so I think those are all examples that kids really can relate to, and I think can help them be engaged in the program.
You mentioned kind of making sure that it's developmentally appropriate. Do you have any tips for people about, okay, what if I've got a younger kid versus, an older kid, what I should or shouldn't do with those?
So the same skills can be taught across ages. With younger kids, we might make them shorter. We might make them more like a game, although even with older kids, games are good. We want to make it fun and engaging and not just sit down and practice your relaxation. With kids of all ages, we also try to build on what they're already doing. So if we think about mindfulness as being a complete focus on the present, and focusing on repetition, and if your mind wanders, just gently bringing yourself back, kids do a lot of things where they might be mindful. So whether that's jumping on a trampoline, playing with their dog, doing some sort of sport, listening to music, talking with a friend, we really, instead of teaching them a rote and rigid way of doing mindfulness, we ask them what they're already doing and build on that. And that can be done in a developmentally appropriate way with kids of all ages.
That's great. Great idea. Thank you for that. Excellent. Jeannie, any questions before we jump into kind of our final three? Anything else you were thinking of?
No, what I wanted to throw in before we get to our final three questions is just how wonderful this conversation has been for, I think, parents that programs like this don't exist for their kids. I think if we can get programs to kids, wow, the power that's in that. But so much of what you said here is such a reminder that we can do it when we're sitting at the breakfast table in the morning. So thank you very much. You've given so much wisdom to myself and to our listeners. Thank you so much, Dr. Henin.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And Dr. Hennin's been so key in getting those programs out to people. So we greatly appreciate that out to kids, all over the country.
And you're right. You do not need to be a psychologist to do this and teach this. And that's something we really believe. This is accessible to anyone of any age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Henin, we end the podcast with kind of three kind of key questions. First question is, everybody deals with stress. Everybody deals with anxiety. Can you talk to us about one thing that you use to kind of calm your nervousness, calm your anxiety?
I am someone who relaxes through activity. I am not someone who sits still very often. And so the things that I find the most relaxing are physical activity. So whether that's running, I love to garden, and gardening is my go-to. I love the smell and the texture and the visual and the beauty and the fact that it's changing every single day. And just look at, in a very mindful way, how the plants are changing and growing, or at this point, not growing. And that is just a source of incredible de-stressing for me.
Next question is, we one of the other things that we try to really tell kids, through this program or through this podcast is really just that a failure is something that everybody deals with. It's not something to be upset about, and that people, even as, highly credentialed, experienced, like I said, Michael Jordan of Child Resiliency has probably gone through a failure or two to,
never.
Career. Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Do you have one you could share with us that you kind of had to deal with, and, maybe what you learned from it or whatever you took away from it?
Absolutely. No, and I share this often because I work with a lot of young, with students and grad students and undergrads. And so I think it's intimidating when you see somebody who's been in the field for 30 years, think, oh, how did they get there? And it looks like it was a straight line. I didn't get into grad school the first time I applied. I got rejected every single one.
Wow.
And in hindsight, probably rightfully so, because I was not prepared and I was not mature enough. And it was devastating. And so I had to take a year and figure things out. And then I reapplied and I ended up getting in. But that was such a powerful experience because, it would have been very different possibly had that not.
Dr. Henin, you really are like Michael Jordan, because I think he didn't make his varsity basketball.
Right, exactly.
So I'm seeing a lot of similarities here.
That's really funny.
A lot of them.
You don't want to see my basketball game, though.
Just, you're going to stick to gardening, okay?
I'm going to stick with gardening.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. And last question, if a parent, just has a few minutes at the breakfast table, or a coach or teacher has just a couple minutes, at the end of class or the end of practice, and want to kind of play one piece from this podcast, what's the main? It could be something we already talked about. It could be something we didn't get to today. What's something you think that could really help them to kind of play for one of their kids to kind of listen to?
I think the most important thing is that stress is automatic, but resilience and coping are not. And it's something that kids and adults have to actively practice and actively seek out to use.
Dr. Henin, thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Henin.
Did I tell you she was awesome, or did I tell you she was awesome?
Oh my goodness. I wonder what it's like to have a brain like that.
No kidding, seriously.
I mean, she's so eloquent and there was so much knowledge. Like everything she said was like a talking point. It was like a buzzword or a buzz phrase, whatever you want to call it. It's just, wow, she's amazing.
Yeah, I'd say it's hard to narrow down, just a couple of things. You kind of got to listen to it several times just to hear all this stuff. And one of the things that I'm really excited that we did is my favorite question now is this failure question.
Yeah.
that we're asking. Who was it, you or I, who came up with that failure question?
I think it was you.
Yeah, I thought it's the smarter of the siblings
Okay,
that thought of that one. Correct? Yeah.
Or the person who's failed more, who's like, please, someone else failed in life, right?
That's probably true. But yeah, I mean, I've gone through a class with her. I've seen her speak several times, and I never ever would have guessed that she didn't make it her first time into grad school. I wouldn't have thought that was possible.
I completely agree with you. And hearing her talk and knowing that she didn't, you would think like, oh, she was always the smartest person in her class and always, got straight A's and got everything that she wanted when it came to, and probably everything. And to know that she didn't, that's so incredibly relatable.
So what do you think, as we wrap it up with a couple things that, kind of takeaways, practical takeaways, what was your favorite?
Elizabeth, in our last episode, talked about how, sitting and breathing and thinking about her breath doesn't work for her. But I loved how Dr. Henin said, kids practice mindfulness all the time. When they're playing with their dog, when they're playing a sport, when they're jumping on a trampoline. And she's totally right. They are focused on that moment and reminding them that maybe sitting still and thinking about your breath or, focusing on one word might not work for you, but there are plenty of times within what they're doing organically and authentically as is just by being a kid that they're practicing mindfulness and having them discover that through what they do day to day.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I really had never thought of that. That is a great one.
What about you?
That the coach one that you talked about, that's probably my favorite one. The coach A, the coach B, the coach C. I know that's true for me. I want coach B. That's the type of coach I want. But in my head, I have to keep reminding myself is usually coach A.
Same.
Yeah. And I would say that's another one that, I've kind of shared with kids, and that's usually one where a light bulb goes off in their head, where they're like, oh yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I should be more of a coach B with my self-talk. So I love that one. I thought that was my favorite. But like you said, there was so many great ideas. It's hard to narrow it down to, just to a couple.
Well, if that is guest number 2 on our podcast, I cannot wait for the future.
Ditto. Yes, I'm excited for next month then.
Yes, we will see all of you next month. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is sponsored by Happy You're Here, educational, safe, and joyful videos for kids. Through music, visuals, and sound, your baby, toddler, and preschooler will learn about letters, numbers, and so much more. Happy You're Here is quality screen time that both kiddos and their adults can feel good about. Head to www.youtube.com/@SoHappyYouAreHere to check it out or click on the link in the show notes.
The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is also sponsored by the Resilient Youth Program. If you're a parent, teacher, or school administrator who wants to incorporate a proven resiliency building program into your school's curriculum, then the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher program is exactly what you need. This curriculum brings coping skills and life management tools into the school environment to help students better manage daily stress and positively impact their academic performance, mental health, and well-being. For more information, visit the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher website website in the show notes or at www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. That's www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by sister brother team Jeannie and Tom Klashevitz. Do you know a kid or teen who has a question they would like answered by one of our guests? If so, visit www.smarthwp.com/Raising Resilient Kids podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next month.